Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am the Omni Viewer, and I know it's been a while since I've done a live stream, but I'm finally back and I am not alone. With me today is an old friend and independent filmmaker, stop motion animator, sword fighter, and general all around interesting person I think you guys would like to know a little bit better. You've seen him occasionally on the channel before, and now here he is live for everyone to see.
Hi.
This is Thomas Nicol. Feel free to introduce yourself in any way, even if it's just repeating what I said.
I greatly enjoy that you referred to me as a madman in the title, and I'm going to own it.
As you should, sir. As you should. So, the way that we know each other, just for anyone watching this who doesn't know, is that we met years and years and years ago, back when we were still very, very young. We were both homeschooling at the time. There was a homeschooling community, and everybody considered each other friends, but the two of us hit it off in particular because we realized we had a particular shared interest in stuff like performing and making movies and whatnot. So that from there, things just kind of grew. It was, I sometimes, I think one way we can describe it is if you guys have the DVD of The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms and you watch the special feature where Ray Bradbury and Ray Harryhausen are being interviewed together, and they talk about how Bradbury said their original plan was to go to Hollywood. He would write the dinosaur movies and Harryhausen would make them. That's kind of our dynamic. I was the writer, he was the filmmaker, and the stop motion animator to boot. So, anything you'd like to add to that particular backstory?
Well, so we had a fantastic series that we ran through our teenage years, the It Could Happen movies, which delightfully came from just kind of wanting to do some special effects. It's like, hey, I just found some, fire footage on the internet that I now know how to put in Premiere and make it look like we're blasting fire out of this super soaker. Let's come up with a story that we can have somebody blasting fire out of super soaker, and then we made a whole franchise out of it, and it was absolutely delightful.
Yeah,
it was sort of a I don't know, Twilight Zone-ish thing.
Yeah,
each episode was pretty much independent. I don't remember if we had any running gags aside from the title things.
No,
we didn't have recurring characters or anything. I'm sure we would have gotten there if we had kept going.
Just recurring performers.
Yep. No, I think the second one we did was one of my favorites. The first one was It Could Happen to You, and of course the second was It Could Happen to You Too.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, as I recall, you had a problem with your kitchen. It was possessed by demons, and so you hired me, an appliance exorcist, who ended up meeting a dark fate in one appliance or another.
Mm-hmm. Kind of partly inspired by a Looney Tunes short called The Duxorcist, and we just ran with the idea, just messing around. But I still have those on the DVD you made somewhere.
Oh, excellent. I think that I have digital copies. I don't know that I have a hard copy that's survived.
Yeah, I should see those again at some point. Those were fun.
Yeah.
Now, of course, another thing we kind of collaborated on, I only collaborated so much, but you also did sort of this Lovecraftian short film, The Window into Time, which again I have a hard copy of.
Yeah.
If you
saw one of the best compliments I got on that one in particular at the HP Lovecraft Film Fest, someone came up afterwards and was like, I was trying to figure out through the whole thing which story you were adapting here, because it felt so much like a Lovecraft story, but it was our own thing.
Yep. Yeah, very sort of done as a scientist recording his experiments in figuring out that this what seems like ancient mysticism is really science, typical Lovecraft theme, but this allows him to look back into the past. And of course, the more he looks, the more something else starts to look back.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty interesting. And then, of course, I think you included on this was one of the special features on this Bedtime for Timmy.
That is entirely possible. It would have been the right era for it.
One of your strange little stop motion shorts, and you actually we have to talk about how you started in stop motion, because you actually started with Lego.
Oh yeah. Lego. Anybody looking to get into stop motion, Lego is one of the best ways to do it, because it's so easy to get puppets up and going. You have, things are made to stick together. I would definitely recommend getting some. It's called tacky wax. It's used for museum displays. Basically, keep things from sliding around. It's not like a glue, but it'll help, hold something very light in place, and it's very easy to smush it around. So that frees you of the stud limitations quite a bit. But yeah, no, I started with the Lego Movie Maker set way back in the day, and have worked with other types of puppets and such since. But I keep coming back to Lego. Actually, the last stop motion I did was a Lego short for Pens to Lens last year, which I'm sure we will talk about Pens to Lens at some point.
Oh yeah, we've got to get to Pens to Lens. But you also, as you've moved past, well, not moved past, but expanded from initial Lego, you also have made your own armatures.
Oh yeah. Both wire and actual ball and socket steel armatures. You can get the components for that relatively cheaply. There are also some, really nice pre-made ones that you can get for somewhat more expensive. But no, those are just an absolute delight to work with.
And you made such interesting things like the aforementioned Bedtime for Timmy thing, which I mean, I don't think we have a version we can show here, but basically the simple premise: a kid trying to go to bed, but there's some kind of a monster in his room, and how he deals with it, or what it actually winds up being. There's a weird twist at the end. And of course, you've actually done some stop motion for Lego, haven't you?
I did, yeah. So it was I don't remember what year it was, maybe 2017-ish. So they're I don't know if there's still, the site is still active. What was it called? So there was Pop Tent way back in the day that had commercial contests to link big brands to independent creators to actually make commercial products. And there was another site that took off after that one fell down. It started with a T. I don't remember what it was called, but they had a sort of like insider private project that I got invited to, that was basically being in this small group that pitched concepts to Lego for various sort of special event, holiday special, whatever, shorts over the course of the year. And one of them, my pitch was actually accepted. It was a Halloween short. Are we able to pull up videos on here? Because I can find that link if you want. It's 30 seconds long.
If you drop me a link in the private chat, I might be able to pull that up and do a screen share. But yeah, you might actually be able to see it right now, folks. We'll see what happens. If you can't find it, can you do the Thanksgiving one?
Oh yeah. So there was a pitch that was not accepted that I ended up making a longer short than it would have been, but hang on. Okay, where's my private chat?
in the studio all the way at the bottom. Okay.
There we go.
I haven't actually done this before, but let's see if I get this right. Then
That looks promising.
let's see. I guess I need to. I'm just working on it. No, I don't think that's it. See, I've never had to do this on my on a live stream before, so but it should.
Would it be under like screen share?
Possibly. I'm just trying to. Yep. This is the beauty of live streaming, people. It can result in some rather I feel like it should be under Let's try this and see where it goes. If I do this and there's...
Yeah, there it is. Woo! Infinite windows.
So can you still see us, though?
Yeah, I can see us off to the side.
Okay.
Now let's see if it actually grabs the audio from it.
Indeed. Let's... just a moment. Can people hear that?
I cannot.
Was that better?
Nope. Maybe this will be a live stream without video accompaniment. That is fine too.
Could be. But well, I was trying. Well, anyway,
both of those shorts are linked from my website, and I think that the URL is in the description. So if folks want to browse my work,
yeah,
that is where you can find it.
Hang on, I'll try putting a link to it in the actual chat if people want to watch it, or maybe I'll move it to the description or something. So, all right, it's in the chat for people if they want it. Anyway, sorry about that. I thought we'd be able to do that a little better. This is what I get for not practicing this sort of thing. But anyway, we were talking about how you actually got involved in it, how you got connected with Lego, and
oh yeah, so it was through this website that generally connects big brands with creators, and I had done some other stop motion work through them, so that they knew that was kind of my thing, and so we were among others who pitched for. There was, I don't know, maybe 8 to 10 projects over the course of the year that mostly they did not go for my stuff. That is fine. I got Halloween. I consider that the big win, and got the idea for Goblin with Gloria. Basic pitch is that it is an episode of a cooking show that is hosted by a turkey doing a Thanksgiving special, and the turkey makes a dark realization, and getting to do it without direct studio involvement meant could just make the version that we wanted to make. And I'm glad it went out that way.
Indeed. Yeah, you've reposted it every year, and every time my dad sees it comes up, he shows it to people he hasn't shown it to yet, or even people he has shown it to because they need the reminder. Let's see. But another thing that you've been involved in, which I think is actually a really great project. You're one of the founders, if not the founder, of Pens to Lens, which, if anyone here hasn't heard of that, please take it away. Tell us all.
So I'd be surprised if most folks have heard of Pens to Lens. It's a very local thing, but it's a program that we have been running. Well, so we ran in Champaign, Illinois from 2013 through 2019, and then took a few year hiatus when the world ended. But we are just kicking our second year back. Essentially what Pens to Lens is it's a student screenwriting competition where K through 12 students write 5-page screenplays, which then local filmmakers will read and pick their favorites to produce as actual short films. And then there's a big premiere event at a gorgeous old theater, and so the kids can go and walk the red carpet and get the paparazzi treatment, and then watch their movie on a 50-foot screen with a large beautiful theater full of excited people to see their movie. And as a filmmaker, getting to give a kid that experience and getting to see your work on the screen with a very excited audience is pretty great too. So it's a very, very fun program. We over the 2013 through 2019 that I was very, very involved in making sure that it happened. I think it's the best description of my relationship to it. We produced over 100 short films by kids. Post-pandemic has been a slower start. We used to get maybe 200 scripts submitted every year, and last year we had 19, and this year we're up to 33, and they're actually a fairly high quality bunch this year. So I'm hoping that a good number of those get made.
Yeah, that's gotta be a dream come true for those kids, right? Because, they get to have people who are actually passionate about filmmaking and acting that take their ideas and bring it to life.
Oh, somebody asked in the chat if we're showing at the Pickwick. We are a few hours south of Chicago, so we are not in the neighborhood of the Pickwick, but think that theater. That is it is slightly bigger than that, but that vibe for sure.
Yeah, and are there any particular films that have stood out in your memory that you would want to share with us?
Let's see. So from Pens to Lens, there's actually, I think I have stuff tagged on the site. So you can actually go to a whole Pens to Lens category. So the one I did last year is called Carson and Bella Find a Sewer Apple. It's a stop motion short written by, I think it was a group of second graders, like 4 guys that wrote a, tiny little script that is just a couple of kids chasing an apple down into the sewer. Then, as things happen when you drop it in the sewer, of course, it becomes a large living version of itself and it chases them back out. And it was a beautiful little script that they didn't intend to use as a great example of story structure and, nested storytelling, but I absolutely loved it. And yeah, there are a bunch of others in here that I either directed or did cinematography for. Some of them are stop motion, some of them are live action, just a whole bunch of fun stuff.
Yeah, you guys should definitely check them out. Keep in mind they are written by children, but
that's even part of the joy of many of them.
Exactly. You get to have that experience of seeing a child's imagination in the highest quality possible. And when we were kids, we had to do that for ourselves. There wasn't a group of filmmakers out there who were like, "Hey, we'll take that script and do a festival around it."
We do also accept entries made by kids directly. that, we'll try and include as many of those as we can.
Hmm.
I've actually been pretty disappointed with the level of engagement that we've gotten on that. Like, as someone who was super into movie making as a teenager, as a kid, this would have been so exciting to be able to, submit stuff to something that get played on the screen like that. And we've just gotten so very little. Kids will make stuff, but then they won't send it to us, or, they'll think about making it and then not, which, it happens. Been there.
Yeah, but well, you said that it's growing again, so
yeah,
you never know. But I mean, everybody's got camera these days, as they say. So that, statistically speaking, there's got to be there's got to be more kids out there willing to do that sort of thing, make their own movies and then submit them.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've always thought that was a great little thing. I do remember the first time you mentioned it, I was actually a little confused because I hadn't been given full context of it at first. You just sent me some stuff, and I was like, "Oh, okay. What is P2L?" Okay,
yeah.
I don't want to. I feel like I should know. Maybe he did mention it, but since I've actually put all the pieces together, yeah, it's something pretty special, I think, and I really hope that it's an idea that kind of spreads eventually.
Yeah, we had that hope back in the day. There was actually a group in Arizona, I think, that had some connection to one of the kids that got a script made, and it was like, I don't know, some relative of his thought that this was a great idea and tried to get something going down there that I don't know that quite got off the ground, but there was an attempt made anyway.
Yeah, we actually do have a question from the chat. What are some of your favorite movies? So there's a chance to go.
All right. Well, that is an enormous question, so I'm not going to try to give an exhaustive list. Easy one. One of the most perfect movies ever made is Jurassic Park. Always got to go back to that one. I'm also a big fan of cosmic horror, and Sunshine is actually a really fantastic example of that, despite not, having any overt, Lovecraft mythos connections. I thought that it did a fantastic job of using the sun as almost like a great old one, like the idea of this, inhuman yet somehow personified character that is just incomprehensibly powerful and kills you without even trying to do so. Other favorite movies. Stoker is great. It's the Korean director who made Old Boy, his first US production. It is a great coming of age movie. This girl growing up and discovering herself, we'll say. It's one that I really enjoyed going in, not knowing what it was about, except for having the vague sense that, it's called Stoker, and that's maybe a reference to Bram Stoker. And I will tell you right off, it is not a vampire movie, but that was a delightful mindset to go into watching it. I think that it's one that you should just let it tell you what it is about as you go on.
Let's see, what else? Like anything that you've drawn inspiration from, classic, modern, whatever. Obviously Jurassic Park, but
I don't know. I kind of draw inspiration from a whole lot of places. One of the more direct inspirations I took from Sunshine. I love the shot at the beginning that it's basically introducing the ship that has this big round shield, and sort of the ship flies past the camera and then is continuing towards the sun. And the way that it's framed, it becomes almost like a pupil in the eye of the sun, and sort of, subconsciously establishing that as a character. And so just the idea of having that kind of shot creating this vibe. I had a later short called Dark Watch that is adaptation of a script written or a story written by someone who submitted it to a contest for the late nights at the art era is a whole other story. But basically I was helping program late night content at a local theater that no longer exists, tragically. But we had a contest for like sci-fi stories or something, and the one that I adapted is basically this, you know, collection of colony ships going to a new planet, and they get hit by something on the way there, and just sort of establishing this journey and having the overall sort of relationship of the ships to each other, set it up as a pentagram because there are 5 ships. And so creating this shape, you know, it's not an eyeball, is doing something different, but, you know, taking the idea of having, you know, these ships creating some organic shape that tells you something to expect in the movie was a fun thing that I lifted out of that. I don't know. There's so many good movies out there. More recent stuff, I absolutely love Godzilla -1. That was fantastic. That is relevant to the interests of this channel specifically.
Very much so. Yeah, looking forward to seeing what Yamazaki does with the next one.
Oh yeah.
Also, from the same person, he asked this before, kind of got lost in the earlier chat, but our thoughts about the unfortunate passing of David Lynch. I mean, I was never really that big a fan of Lynch just because, you know, never really saw most of his stuff. But, you know, it is still tragic. I acknowledge his influence and impact on things. So
it's funny, right around then. So just before he died, then I helped a friend out on a short that is not publicly shareable yet. It's just kicking off its festival run. So it's not something that is posted on my website or anything. But it was... So he's a budding filmmaker, looking to get into it, and had some ideas that were, you know, bigger than he could bite off right up front. And apparently the idea for this came from a conversation that we had at a movie makers meeting that I was recommending to him. You know, figure out a location that you can actually have access to and write a story around that. And so he decided that he was going to, you know, he could rent a room at the library, but, you know, book a room. And so what could he do in a very plain, drab room? And he tapped into his own experience as a Chinese immigrant and the bureaucratic horror, say, of going through the immigration process. And so it's a short about a marriage interview. It's something that you have to do as you're, you know, getting your green card, basically giving evidence that you have a real relationship with the person that you say you're married to, essentially. And it is a short that starts out very normal and then just starts ramping up the weird. Like the questions get more invasive and stranger, and like, why are you even asking this? What sense does this make at all? And he wanted to take some inspiration from David Lynch in shooting this. And I was running camera for him. And so he sent me this scene from Inland Empire that particularly inspired him on this. And it's a scene with a couple characters sitting across from each other at a table. And when you have shots of Laura Dern, then it's a very normal sort of focal length, like maybe 50 millimeters. And, you know, it's a normal, you know, medium close-up shot. And then you have the shot of the woman on the other side of the table, and it's like this extreme fisheye, like everything is bulged out and warped and it's right up in her face. And then they have this conversation back and forth like this. And so I decide that what I want to do for this short is we're going to sort of use these two extremes and shift between them as a storytelling device. So, you know, we're sitting in this tiny little drab room. There isn't that much we can do interesting visually. So over the course of the short, the camera slowly creeps up every few lines, just gets a little closer to the characters and zooms out. So they stay the same size and frame, but there's just this distortion injected in little by little. And so as the questions are getting weirder, then we're kind of creeping up on the characters until we're like, right up in their face with these, big, crazy wide angle stuff. And then a couple shots get like really surreal until it ends and we snap back to the normal place that we started. And it's like this really jarring thing because it happens suddenly rather than, distributed over the course of a, 10-minute short. And it was literally the weekend that we were having the semi-private premiere, just local premiere, not, film fest premiere, but we were having the screening and talking with a local reporter doing promo for it. And we were answering those questions literally on the day that David Lynch died. And so that was like, well, we did not intend it as a, memorandum tribute to him, but this short is visually very inspired by his sort of sensibility.
Yeah. And I suppose he has taken the secret of what the infant really was to his grave.
Guess so.
Yeah. Not that he was ever going to reveal it anyway. Let's see. Are there any other questions? We released the movies you made together. I really want to see that kitchen one.
Well, we would definitely get copyright hit with literally everything we did at that point.
So
I think that our theme music was literally like a MIDI version of the X-Files.
A little bit. It wasn't quite the X-Files theme, but definitely in that vein. It would be difficult to...
It was definitely not something that we made and had rights to.
Yeah. Yeah. Although maybe one day, maybe I'll find some way, or you'll find some way, or someone will find some way.
Yeah.
But they should be shared with the world at some point, I think.
There's some fun stuff in there.
They would get to see how we looked when we were much, much younger.
Oh yeah. What were the premises? Let's see if we can remember. So the first one was basically just we get in an argument over somebody messed with somebody's Legos and then somebody blows somebody's head off. Like it was literally just, we wanted to have this really, really poorly done fire effect coming out of Super Soaker.
And the making it look like the head was gone.
Yes. Yeah. Very, very lo-fi VFX from the
yeah. Which
was that even in the 2000s? Yeah, that would have been in the early 2000s. Yeah. It's lo-fi, but to us at the time it was hi-fi. Oh yeah, it was the best we could do. Absolutely. We thought it looked pretty cool, and you know what? It does. Let's see. So in the second one was the Appliance Exorcist.
Think so.
The third one.
Was that the one with the possessed books?
That might have been. Yeah, that definitely has Star Wars music in it. I think that it's the love theme from Star Wars Episode 2.
Yeah.
That just played like the entire thing and just had this way too long montage of me you sadly.
Yeah,
who was who in this? Yeah, it was you. Very sadly putting away all the books that your therapist told you had to get rid of.
All these books that I actually owned about the paranormal.
Yeah.
But of course the books don't want to go. That was a very Twilight Zone-y one.
Yeah.
Then there was the one with the stuffed animals rebelling.
Yeah, that was that number 4?
Might have been.
Okay, so that one actually had one of the cooler shots that we did in any of them. So basically the setup is that there are stuffed animals apparently coming to life and attacking people. And our protagonist, played by my little brother, who is now a dean. That's weird. But anyway, so he's playing this kid who his family has been taken by the stuffed animals, and he's like holed up in the kitchen at night. And there's a point that he hears something and he cracks out his flashlight and he plays it over the ground, and there's just all of these stuffed animals scattered everywhere. And then he pauses the flashlight on one that starts to wiggle, and then as all is one, they like launch themselves at him. And we just did it by playing it backwards. We literally
Yeah.
like had a hamper of stuffed animals and we just threw them out on the floor and then had him play the flashlight over them and played it backwards. And it just happened to get lucky with the last one that stopped moving was the one that he started with the flashlight on.
Mm.
And so it looked like you had this little buildup and then whoosh, that one was a lot of fun. One of my favorites, I think, was 5. That was the environmentally sound garbage disposal.
Yeah.
That a guy found a portal to another dimension in his backyard and decided to start a business getting rid of people's garbage.
Mm-hmm.
And then he's visited by the EPA. And we definitely drew some Matrix inspiration for the agents there, for sure.
Yeah, with the sunglasses and the monotone delivery.
There will be stiff repercussions if you fail to comply.
That was one of the ones that my dog at the time, Shadow, appeared in.
Yeah.
And she put on a great performance. And then the last one, I believe, was the one where we kind of riffed on M. Night Shyamalan's The Village, right?
Specifically the trailer for The Village, because The Village had not yet come out. And we had watched the trailer, and I especially was very, very excited for like the story that I thought we were going to get, which, you know, was not the story we actually got. But we made our own take on that, also playing with Pink Floyd's Sheep. And that was a fun one. That was maybe I think that was the movie. I remember having a moment that was the first time as a filmmaker I made an intentional decision about lighting. Several movies into this series, and we're sitting there with a shot of you in your living room, and it's like, oh, this is a little too dark. And so I take the shade off of the light right next to you, and you get suddenly bright. It's like, oh, hey, we can make choices about how things are lit. That's wild.
That's how it works, right? We were learning as we went.
Indeed.
That this was the time where you could look stuff up on the internet, but it wasn't a habit.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was all of them. I don't think I'm forgetting any. Which means
the titles. The titles there was "It Could Happen to You," "It Could Happen to You Too," "It Could Happen to Anyone," "It Could Happen to Everyone." Yeah, "It Could Happen to Everyone" was the stuffed animal one.
Yeah. I think the fifth one was the next one was "It Could Have Happened to Anyone, but it just happened to happen to this guy."
Yes, and then the last one had 2 titles. Right, there was
The Last Time It Happens.
The Last Time It Happens, or Just Kidding, It Won't Happen.
Yes. Yeah, but we really went all out with those. As all out as we could, certainly. And we learned a lot in the process.
Yep.
And yeah, if it weren't for the copyrighted stuff that we were using, because we didn't care back then, I would upload those in a heartbeat if I could, with your say so, of course. But but yeah, might get in trouble if we do, unless there's some place for that sort of thing where people can put stuff and no one cares.
Yeah.
But let's see. Yeah, there were some fun ones. Oh, another thing we have to discuss, because this is a more recent passion of yours. The whole idea of you taking up sword fighting and fencing and
So my pre-pandemic life and post-pandemic life have been radically different. I'm starting to get back into more filmmaking stuff. That was like absolutely my life pre-pandemic, and things have shifted quite a bit since then.
Everything did.
But so for the past little over a year now, I've been involved with it's called HEMA, Historical European Martial Arts. So I'm with a school that specifically studies the work of a guy named Joachim Meyer, who was a German dude in the 1500s who wrote a very large book on the noble art of fencing that he goes over how to use a long sword, something called a dusak, that's kind of like a cutlass or saber, rapier, which his version of rapier was a like very early version. You talk about rapiers and it covers hundreds of years and it's radically different styles. And the first rapier that I got turns out is really not what Meyer had in mind when he was talking about how to use a rapier. It's like a very different blade. It handles totally differently, but yeah. And then there's dagger and pole arms and yeah, so all kinds of great stuff in there. And there are other schools that, draw from Italian sources or Spanish sources. So basically just reading old books that tell you how to fight and figuring out how to actually do it from that. It is a wonderful union of athleticism and nerdiness that has been giving me a reason to get in shape.
Well, what was that one thing you said to me when we met up at the last G-Fest we were at together about you were descended from Vikings? What was that?
Oh, yeah. So something that I had a realization about with my dog was how much she loves fetch, and just thinking through what does fetch mean to a dog. It's tapping into, partly evolved, partly, trained for, breeded into certain types of dog to, this routine of, hunting something down and bringing it back. And, we don't live in a time that she needs to be hunting her own food. She has, a nice big dish full of kibble and doesn't need to work for it. But there's something in her brain that just needs, that chase. And I am descended from Vikings, and sword fighting is my fetch.
Yep. The need to get out there and swing some cold hard steel around, right?
My ancestors survived by being very good at killing people, and I do not want to kill anyone, but smacking somebody in the head with a sword, that's close enough.
The flat edge, of course.
I mean, we're hitting with edge alignment. It's blunt. They're feather swords used for. It was actually what they used for sport fencing at the time that Meyer wrote his book.
I should have asked. Do you actually have any of your swords with you? Or...
I'd have to run upstairs and grab them.
Should have thought of that beforehand. Oh, yeah. Well. That would have been neat to see, but this is what happens when it's live.
Yep.
But yeah, that's I still think you should try to come up with some sort of way to incorporate the sword fighting into the filmmaking part. Like I
don't know that those things work together at all. Sword fights and movies.
Yeah, those aren't a tradition at all.
It would have been done already, right? Like somebody would have thought of that.
They would have had something about like buckling swashes being the genre or something.
Yeah.
But like I remember you said at one point you got this like wizard looking hood or something that fits over your mask.
Yeah.
And I thought like you can do something with that, like figuring out dueling wizards, but dueling with swords as wands. I think that's something you should try working on. I would write the script. I would come up with something like a tournament arc. I don't know.
Yeah,
but that would be neat.
Wizard fencing, having a tournament for that would be a lot of fun.
I mean, imagine what you could do choreographing that, where you have the different moves with the swords, but not everything is about landing a blow. It's also about casting a spell. Almost sort of like how Avatar: The Last Airbender used actual martial arts with the different element bending.
Yeah.
But with swords. So,
well, I mean, to a degree, that is what you're doing. So getting a little Meyer lesson here for free. So there are 3 reasons that you swing your sword in Meyer. There's a type of cut called a hitter, which is when you are actually trying to hit your opponent. And there is a type of hit called a taker, which means you are taking advantage You're getting yourself in a stronger position that you can, maybe get yourself somewhere that you can actually throw a hitter while still protecting yourself, while keeping control over their sword. And you have what's called a provoker, which is not necessarily trying to take control of their sword or hit them, but to provoke a response that you can then exploit. And so you are going to be waving your sword around with intent that is different than necessarily hitting them, but you are trying to conjure a position that gives you a favorable advantage that you can safely hit them without giving them opportunity to hit you in return. So we can pretend like that is magic. It
or
is
something.
At least linguistically meets the description.
Yeah. I think like you throw this idea past some of the people there, you start working on some choreography, you might come up with some really interesting visual stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. But yeah, there's again, I think there's all sorts of potential to be had with those sorts of things.
Yeah. So someone's asking in chat if we wear armor in HEMA. So we do have like it's not like armor. There is a sort of related, we'll call it sport, called Boohurt, which is basically just a couple dudes in armor wailing on each other. And it is much less interesting because there's not a lot of art to it. I don't know. Maybe I don't know much about Boohurt, so I can't, speak too poorly of something that I don't understand, but it does not hold much interest for me. So we wear fencing masks. It's something that if somebody is not controlled and they're just swinging this metal sword at your head, you could get a concussion. But, we put a lot of focus on safety as, control over your blade necessarily, rather than necessarily relying on safety gear. But, we have big, heavy plastic gloves, plastic panels on arms and padding and jackets and stuff so that, we can have a good time without worrying about breaking anybody's bones.
Yeah. Enough to move and be protected
at
the same time. Actually, just saw another comment in here that Almighty Oreo King might have seen you at the panel we did at G-Fest, Titans and Elder Things.
That was me up there with OmniViewer.
He was the Lovecraft.
It is so much fun to go to G-Fest with Ryan specifically because the fans will recognize him, and I get to see people fanning out, and it's great.
Yeah, and I get to feel awkward about people fanboying over me if they do. But that was the first panel I'd ever done, and great to have you along with it. If you missed it out there, I did post a link to it. It's here on my channel. I posted a link to it over in the community posts area. It's a long one, but definitely worth it. He did the filming and editing for it. Thank you very much. And it was just our little way of sort of bridging the gap between some common interests, because he's a big Lovecraft guy, I'm a big kaiju guy. And I remember the first time we tried reading through that after we made all of our notes and everything. We have to keep it down to 40 minutes. And how long did it take us? Like 3 hours or so?
It was not 40 minutes.
Yeah. I think it was 40 minutes just to get through the first section of it.
We definitely had to prune that down.
Yeah, if you ever want to do a panel yourself, rehearsing and making sure it fits is one of the really interesting parts of the process, let's say, especially when you realize how far you might have gone over. And then you're like, okay, what are the things we actually absolutely have to keep? Because there was
if I remember right, we had a near miss on technical stuff going wrong. I think that we barely made it up to the Q&A. I'm trying to remember what it was. I think in order to get the presentation, we had to have an internet connection.
Yeah.
And it was running through my phone, and my phone was overheating. And so it was warning me it was about to shut down as we were toggling through the last couple slides. and it was like a few seconds after we got to our final, Q&A slide that it actually just died and we lost internet, and we could just, sit there with that up, but, we couldn't have loaded anything else.
Which was fortunate timing.
Yeah. Could have been a lot worse.
And of course, the panel turned out to have a great attendance.
That was a great time.
Yeah, we weren't sure how many people we were going to get because they placed us in the room at the very end of the hall. So it wasn't like you could just be walking past here something interesting and think, oh, I'll see what's in there. You had to actually make a point of intending to go. And a lot of people made that point. It was a good time. And I'm always glad to catch up with you in person at those things. Like when I get the chance to go. I know you're not as big a Godzilla fan. It's not that you don't like Godzilla, but
I quite like Godzilla. I don't need an entire weekend to appreciate Godzilla. I like making an appearance.
Yeah, but still, it's great to catch up with you at those points.
Yeah.
What else? Oh, I don't want to miss this again. Another question about an unfortunate recent passing with Val Kilmer. I guess we should at least acknowledge it, right?
Yeah.
It is unfortunate. He's been out of the picture for so long with the throat cancer and everything. But he leaves behind quite a legacy, just like David Lynch did.
Mm-hmm. Yep, a lot of great work.
It's unfortunate that things kind of fell off for him because he got attached to some really bad stuff, like Island of Dr. Moreau, Red Planet, unfortunately. But at the same time, he left behind some great iconic stuff. Tombstone, Top Gun. I mean, I think he also did some voiceovers for some Studio Ghibli, I think, for the English stuff.
Did he?
I think Porco Rosso, if I remember correctly. Or was that... No, that was the other Batman. That was that was Michael Keaton.
Okay.
He did do... Val Kilmer did do voiceover work for a Spider-Man game, though. Maybe I was getting my wires crossed there. Oh, and of course, Real Genius. You ever see Real Genius? You must.
I have not.
Oh, that's a good one. I'm even speaking as someone who wasn't overly fond of his college experience. I think Real Genius is a blast. It's I don't want to spoil it. Just see if you can track it down.
Real Genius. I will look it up.
Yeah, one of his earlier works from the 80s. Got some interesting stuff with students not realizing they're making a weapon. I'll just
okay.
And some really ridiculous stuff that happens along the way. But let's see. Well, there's I'm trying to think of some other stuff. Is there any particular stuff you want to share just off the top of your head?
I could talk a little bit about the short that I'm working on right now.
Oh yeah, go ahead, please.
So it's called Quiet Tonight, and it's a script written by the lead actor, who is mostly a theater actor, but he's recently gotten more into film. I've worked with him on a couple things before. He is fantastic. Him and the actress both. So Quiet Tonight, there is a woman who has a boyfriend and a twin sister, and it is a serious, gritty, dramatic piece when she is in a world where vampires are not a thing. Like, the vampire media exists, like legendary, whatever vampires as a fictional thing exist. But this is not an unexpected thing to happen. She is bitten and seems to be turning into a vampire. And so it's her boyfriend and her twin sister dealing with this situation where there's like no support, nobody would believe them. What do they do? And just sort of grappling with that question. So it mostly takes place all in one apartment over the course of a night. But we just shot a opening dream sequence that I'm pretty excited with how it's coming together. It's sort of a prologue, that it's a dream that he has before the events of the movie kick off that sort of give you that background in a visually poetic sort of way, and plant some seeds that sprout later on in the short.
Nice.
But yeah, we got a shot in an alley the other night. The last shot that we needed, that involved a practical effect that I'm very, very excited about how well it came off. It involved fog and a projector and a very thin screen to catch a cross section of the projection running through the fog, and it's just crazy shadow effects that turned out really, really great. So I'm pretty excited about that. Hoping to get that wrapped up before this year's Pens to Lens season kicks off too hard. So next couple of months, I hopefully will have that wrapped up.
Yeah, that actually reminds me. You had another short film about a couple meeting and playing chess.
Yes, so the Venus Gambit is out. It is one of the most recent shorts posted on my website. I describe it as a chess rom-com. It's a 7-minute short that is just this couple that apparently met online having a first date at a coffee shop that just happens to have a chessboard on the table and some pieces there, and so they start a game and things go from there. But I'm quite happy with how that came out. It had a bit of a festival run. It played, 3 places, played well where it did, won an award at Gen Con, actually. It was the best gamer film that year. Where else are you going to get that award?
Yeah.
But yeah, it was actually the same lead actor who ended up writing Quiet Tonight and approached me about directing that.
And the Venus Gambit was inspired by your actual fascination with the game of chess.
That and a disappointing conversation on Hinge.
So we've got to hear more.
Okay. So Hinge is a dating app that gives you, so you can upload 6 pictures and respond to 3 prompts to have your profile. Like, here's me. Like, do you want to go on a date? And so looking at this one woman's profile, one of the prompts that she picked, so you pick the prompt, there's a, library of various prompts you can pick, and then you write your answer to it. And so the prompt that she picked was, teach me something about blank. And she put chess or history. And I'm like, oh, hey, I just looked up this thing because, my interest in chess. Apparently the earliest recorded chess game with recognizably modern rules. This is after it came out of India through the Middle East, through Northern Africa, and landed in Moorish Spain, that we had, recognizably modern rules. And it was actually a poem that these 3 poets collaborated on. They each, wrote a stanza. So you'd have a stanza about, so it's about a chess game played between Mars and Venus, with Mercury just sort of spouting off things about chess that he thinks is interesting. And so each stanza switches between, Mars move, Venus's move, Mercury commenting on stuff. And so these 3 poets, wrote an entire chess game with, stanzas describing each move with very explicitly defined symbolism for each piece. And it's, kind of a fun thing. And so I tell her, and she has basically no interest in this whatsoever. And it was like, you had 3 prompts and you put one out there that you were not actually interested in something that, as far as I can tell, that actually, whatever. So, we had one date that didn't have a whole lot of chemistry, and we moved on and it was fine. But I was like, what if you had a chess rom-com that actually came out of that? And so I wrote that script, and we had a lot of fun with it.
Yeah. Glad to know it's available for people to see. And your website is down in the description of this video. For hopefully the link works. You said there needed to be a little bit debugging, but should work now, I think.
Yeah, the theme that I had been using for a while, I think that the people who made it got hacked, and so it was doing these weird redirects. And I'm hoping that is cleared up. But if people get weird redirects, please do not click anything. It is spam. If it is not clearly my website, do not touch.
But well, we can talk a little bit more about the chess thing. We spoke so much about the swordplay. Like, what is your fascination with chess specifically?
So I kind of got into chess over. Well, so I played chess in like high school.
Yeah, we
not
played
like
chess together
competitively, but like, yeah, like it's a fun game. But it was something that I got into over the pandemic when, my filmmaking life evaporated, and it's like, well, I need something to obsess over. Maybe I'll get good at chess because I could, play chess puzzles on my phone and, digitally play games over the internet with people, or, play bots of various levels and play styles. And, so it was really a pandemic thing that I've just kind of kept up with, because honestly, like, there's a lot of overlap with the sword stuff, just in terms of the, higher level strategy that you use when, you're beyond the point of thinking about how the pieces move. And, this is a basic fork, but like, when you're making moves, when there's not a very clear thing that you're trying to accomplish, that's it's called positional chess. That is, what are places that I can put my pieces that they're likely to be useful later on? What are configurations that are going to make the most use of these, whether or not they're accomplishing something concretely right now? And with sword fighting, then there's this whole, approach where, especially in Meyer, he's, advises you not to have like just one stance that you're in, like constantly switch where your sword is. And so, your opponent doesn't necessarily know where you're coming from. And, when the attack comes, then they haven't necessarily thought through exactly what it is you're going to be doing from this place. And so, you're constantly switching off, they're constantly switching off, and you are theoretically trying to find a favorable position. And so that sort of exercise with chess works the same sort of muscles that I would use in, sword fighting context. And so it's fun to find these synergies between, things that interest you.
Yeah, you also said that you found it fascinating. You told me at one point that chess in its own way is sort of a universal language almost.
It is. Yeah. Like, that sword fighting, like it's a nonverbal thing, but it's such a, ancient, ubiquitous game that, like, you could be traveling and sit down at a cafe and be able to play a chess game with somebody that you'd have no common language, but the rules of the game, and you have this interaction that exists on the board, which was part of the reason that I wanted to make that chess rom-com, is to sort of explore how these characters get to know each other through their gameplay.
Yeah, and it's fascinating stuff. And of course, like, knowing you like that, knowing you like Jurassic Park, I got you a Jurassic Park chess set one Christmas, and
it was
you make good use.
I bring that to the my family has an annual beach vacation in the Outer Banks, and I have a nephew that enjoys chess, and I always bring that to play chess with him specifically.
Well, what better way to get him interested, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Let's see. Have there been any other interesting questions? Oh. Would you ever check out Liam Vickers' animation / scary story time with Liam? One's an indie animation channel, and the other is all his old stories with some viewer submissions.
Liam Vickers animation.
Or Scary Story Time with Liam. Apparently there are two different channels.
I am not familiar. I will check that out.
First I've heard of it too. Have to make a particular search for that.
Yeah.
But Let's see. Are there any other upcoming did you want to tell people about Krampusnacht at all? Or
Yeah, well, so I have yet to put out the call for entries for this year, and we didn't have one last year. But the Krampusnacht Freaky Film Fest is a project that I've been running since right before the pandemic. It was inspired in part by another local film fest that ran for a while in the 2010s that a friend of mine who owned a winery at the time called Sleepy Creek Vineyards had the Freaky Creek Film Fest, which was already a really great time around Halloween. A lot of local filmmakers would make stuff specifically to play at Freaky Creek. And so it was, it was more of an audience than just filmmakers, which is always a great thing at a film fest. But a lot of it was, just like, we're going to make wild stuff and then, get together and have this kind of filmmaker party where we see the weird stuff that we all made to amuse each other. And it just had a really, really fun vibe. It was very much a horror comedy spectrum fest that, there was a lot that fell in, the horror comedy genre, and some stuff that was straight up horror, some stuff that was more just like absolute absurd comedy. And it all sort of fell under the term freaky. And so I wanted to make a freaky film fest after my friend sold his winery and moved to Mexico and then moved to Wisconsin because they were not ready to retire with the Canadians. And so in 2019, up through 2023, I think was the last year I did it. Did not do it last year, but had a Krampusnacht themed film fest in early December that had a host named Randolph, which was a character I had come up with for some other project that didn't end up happening. But he's Randolph the Paranoid Reindeer. And so he sort of, as a stop motion reindeer, but he lives in a bunker and has red line, yarn pin maps behind him. And the film fest is his effort to gather and present evidence to convince Santa that the Krampus is in fact real and is coming and is a threat. The last fest that played, then, so the fest before that, he was actually kidnapped at the end and replaced by a sort of Stepford Wives version of Randolph. And then in 2013, then it all played out with his automated backup system that had been collecting this evidence and was, spawning stuff off in his absence. And then someone broke into the lab and burned everything. And so we sort of, it was kind of giving myself a narrative reason to take a year off. But we are talking about bringing that back this year. And I perhaps have talked one Omniviewer into providing a voice for another character, which I should actually write that sometime soon because I got to get call for entries out. We are definitely past the point that I should have done that.
I would definitely be interested in that voiceover.
Excellent.
I think I saw some other. Just what? Here's a question: is there a large filmmaking community in your area? It is a question, even though there's a period.
Yeah. So there has been. It is smaller now than it has been in the past. Like I said, the pandemic. When you have a whole bunch of people who are, routinely getting together in confined spaces to make movies, and then suddenly you can't get together in confined spaces, the people who are doing it professionally, find ways to continue doing it professionally and safely. But for those of us that were just doing it for fun, then there was really no reason to take that risk. And so a lot of people just sort of dropped off the scene, found other things to do for a couple of years. And a lot of them are still doing the things that they found to do otherwise. So it is less of a scene, but slowly growing. We've got a couple people who have gotten involved recently who are shooting shorts. I just helped out one guy with a fun little short called Puppicide. That it's a couple of detectives tracking down a suspect that turns out to be a puppet. And it is a absolutely ridiculous, quick, witty, surreal banter landing in a rather grotesque joke that I quite enjoy.
Well, I'm sure it's better than the Happy Time Murders. I think there were... I'm familiar with these ones, but are you familiar with the channel's Bedtime Stories and Wartime Stories?
I do not know Bedtime Stories or Wartime Stories.
I think they're the same people. They're basically channels that do paranormal stuff, or like that they say they cover a wide variety of stuff. They largely land on paranormal, largely told with illustrations, very, very, very limited animation, if you could call it that, but some pretty interesting stuff that they discuss. I think they've discussed some rather obscure things, like they're one of the few channels I've seen ever cover the nameless thing of Berkeley Square, which is like you know that one? Did I ever tell you about that one? The nameless thing of Berkeley Square sounds like it should be an H.P. Lovecraft story, except it was happening before Lovecraft was born.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's this apartment building or flat, if you're actually in England, on Berkeley Square, where it's said that this semi-formless tentacled creature is living. And like I said, that sounds like it should be a Lovecraft thing, but purportedly it's real and predates Lovecraft. So
it's delightful.
Yeah, it's a weird story. But I guess since we brought up the topic of the paranormal, are there any regardless of if you think there's any merit to it existing or not, are there any paranormal things that you find yourself particularly fascinated by?
So I am particularly fascinated with... Well, so let me frame it this way. I went on a ghost tour with my ex-girlfriend a while back. And the tour guide, kind of as a joke, I think that she thought she knew the answer. She asked me, if I believe in ghosts. And I went straight to Shakespeare. There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy. And I apply that both to believing in ghosts and not believing in ghosts. Because, you can not believe in ghosts, saying there's only the physical world, and like there's more to life than is dreamt of in your philosophy. Or, you can look at these experiences people have that they describe as ghosts. This is the story we tell ourselves about it. And I would like to think that it is even weirder than that. So I am very interested in the specific relationship between actual physical reality and one's subjective experience of it. And I think that there's a lot of space between your, sensory experience of objective reality and, your brain's processing of that. Whether or not, we live in an actual simulation, all of us live in simulations. Like everything that you are experiencing right now is something generated by your brain, incorporating external sensory data. So, we can have very similar simulations. And, if you're going to communicate with people, then you need to have some kind of common ground you can work on. So it's very fortunate that we can do that. But fundamentally, what you are experiencing is a simulation. And there are all kind of ways that can, go sideways. Like, optical illusions are an obvious one. Like there's just limitations in our actual ability to perceive things that can show up as weird glitches. If anybody has ever done psychedelics, then that's a much wilder exploration of what, your simulation can create for you. But the idea of, encountering ghosts within the framework of like, what is it that you are actually encountering is something that I find really interesting. So let me talk a little bit about something that I did some research into over the past couple of years. So this is something I discovered when I was, I did say I didn't want to talk about this a whole lot, but I did just direct an immersive horror show. And I don't want to talk about it too much not just because I like being mysterious, but it's also a fairly odd genre. Like imagine if Fear Factor had a storyline to it, is how I've kind of heard some of these shows described. It is a very wide genre with a lot of different people that do different things, and there are actually some pretty scary people out there that you would very much want to avoid. But in my research for this show, I wanted to play with some effects that, can lean into creating a sense of a paranormal experience. And I read a couple of papers by this guy named Vic Tandy, who in, I think it was the late 80s, early 90s or late 90s, generally that era. He was an engineer, lived in England, and his first paper was basically describing a experience that he had that by, all standards would count as a paranormal experience, that he managed to figure out what was actually driving it scientifically. So he was alone in his lab at night. Imagine a 30-foot long room, bunch of workbenches. Usually there are more people, but he's working late. And he just has this sense of foreboding, like there's a presence there. And then his eyes are feeling weird, and he out of the corner of his eye he sees this gray apparition kind of appear, and when he looks, then there's nothing there, and he gets kind of freaked out and goes home. Now the next night, then he's there, and apparently engineers and fencing go together, because he was a fencer and he was repairing his foil, and he had it clamped in a vise on one of these benches near the middle of the room. And he goes into the other room to get something, and comes back, and the foil is going like there's nothing there, but it's just. And so he figures out what's going on. And long story short, he tracks it down to a new exhaust fan that had just been installed in the ventilation system that was slightly loose and was vibrating, creating a 19 hertz impulse. Now 19 hertz, the quarter wavelength is about 30 feet. So it just happened to be resonant frequency for one of the directions of the space that he was in. And it was creating this standing wave that is, the threshold of human hearing is about 20 hertz. So this is just below the threshold of actually being able to hear it, but you can feel it. And it feels like a presence. And he wrote up a follow-up paper that there was, I think that he's in Covington, England, maybe. But anyway, there's a tourist site that, is castle ruins or something. And there was a 14th century basement under this tourist building that had some, paranormal reports. People had, experienced things. And he went in there and did an acoustic analysis and found that there was a huge spike in resonance right around 19 hertz. And so we didn't figure out what the impulse had been in these instances where people had encountered something. You could imagine a bus driving by and having enough of a rumble that when you have a space that is, is a much more complex space, like you have a 30-foot room, that's pretty simple. But this was a few different rooms with different doorways in different points. And so doing this actual acoustic analysis to discover that spike was pretty much the only way that he could do it. But it was right there at about the point that he had experienced in his lab. And a few years after that, he died. He didn't do any more papers. But there was another one that I looked at. A number of people have tried to test this over the years, and to mostly not much success. What I noticed in all the papers, though, was that his experience was specifically in spaces with a resonant frequency, creating standing waves. It's not just the presence of this audio, it's creating that, all the air is involved in this, and it's this weird discontinuity. But there was one test that was very specifically testing, does this have an impact on people's perception of paranormal things? And so it was actually a group that worked with a ghost tour in Edinburgh that over the course of, I don't remember how it was hundreds of these ghost tours. Well, no. Hundreds of people in the ghost tours. I don't remember how many tours there were. But about half of them had these audio emitters hidden along the ghost tour route that were emitting 19 hertz audio. And the other half did not. And they all filled out questionnaires afterwards. And what they discovered was interesting, that between the groups, there really wasn't a difference in the proportion of people who reported having some kind of paranormal experience over the course of the tour. However, in the group that had the 19 hertz frequency pulsing at them, they were far more likely to have multiple. So if you think about it in terms of, just general suggestibility, that there are some people who are going to be interpreting things a certain way. So about a third of the people in each of these tour groups were going to find things over the course of the tour to be spooky, to give themselves that reaction. And the people who were given this 19 hertz signal found a lot more opportunities to do that. And so in this show that I just directed, we actually used a subwoofer capable of producing 19 hertz. And it happened to be, we were in a basement that was 60 feet long, which is, half wavelength. Or maybe that's full wavelength and 30 is, I don't remember. Not important. But there were like hot spots and standing waves like that you could, walk through a spot that was, maybe 15 feet in front of where the sub was hidden. And there was a particularly big hot spot right there, which makes a lot of sense. But the wild thing was sort of diagonally opposite across the room. If you like mirrored things about that spot, there was another hot spot that was just like, the way that the wave was constructively or deconstructively reinforcing itself. There was just this random spot that happened to have a higher concentration of, like, you walk through it and, you're not hearing anything, but you can feel something there. That and, the initial descent down the stairs when you have, 19 hertz pulsing at you, like it feels different. So yeah, that's my thought on the paranormal. It's a lot of fun. Figure out how to hack your brain to achieve that. And there's always something weirder.
Yep. But none of you were expecting to hear that level of detail. Yeah, I'm thinking about like the effect sound can have. I specifically I like to listen to music when I'm writing. It helps me concentrate. But on my playlist, I used to have certain excerpts from the different Indiana Jones soundtracks. And I remember I eventually wound up taking one of them off in particular. It was the chanting from inside the Temple of Doom. Because towards the end, where all that chanting reaches a fever pitch, it actually started to freak me out, and I could never place why, other than just it sounded horrifying. Like it's just the music. I know the scene it's in context with and everything, and I'm not really listening to it fully as I'm writing. But that you get to that song, and it's just like, I don't feel safe. I don't know why. Which, speaks to how good John Williams is at doing music. But yeah, I can certainly see how that. I don't know if there's a 19 megahertz thing in there or anything, but if there is, and I also remember
my internet just glitched for a minute. Sorry if I disappeared.
You didn't disappear. You were just kind of still for a moment. I was talking about being disturbed, so it actually kind of works. So sort of like one of those glitchy analog horror things.
Yeah.
Or I also remember every now and then when I've been searching on Tubi for stuff to watch, came across this movie called Antrim, which is supposed to be like, it opens with some docudrama segments claiming that this is a movie that was considered lost, it's now found, and it's considered cursed. And the movie itself is like, it's a very dark and disturbing horror movie on its own, but then it appears to be intercut with footage that's even more disturbing of like people being kidnapped and attacked and tortured and stuff. I haven't watched it though, because when I researched it, I saw that apparently the audio track contains some kind of, I don't know, I don't remember exactly what it is, but it's like some sort of frequency or something that actually is damaging to the brain. So I was like, I don't think I want that.
That's fair.
Yeah. um, yeah. So if you ever come across Antrim on Tubi, watch at your own risk.
Okay.
Oh, clearly we have fascinated people. Do you fear the flesh-eating hamsters from Shadow Mars?
Well, now I do.
I would too. Yeah, I think we need more information on that. But yeah, there are some fascinating topics out there. So, how long have we been going at this point? I'm just curious.
About an hour and a half.
Oh, not bad. Let's see. Was there anything else you wanted to discuss while we were here, or do you feel like it's
unless you
down?
wanted my hot take on the town called Wuhan. I was telling Ryan before we went on air, he was asking me if there's anything to talk about, and I kind of jokingly brought up I friend just hosted a conspiracy theories and soup night. So we made a soup to share and brought a brief presentation on a conspiracy theory of our choice. And I did an exhaustive deep dive on exactly how we were all lied to in the past few years. And it's a wild ride, but I don't know if that's in scope for our conversation here. Just saying, I am the titular madman.
Indeed. I don't know. I feel like Soup Night would be a good place to talk about GMO conspiracies myself.
Could be.
Specifically if you make something that's filled with them. And
it's
like, and that is all what you've all just eaten. Good night. Wait a minute. So I guess you have to now.
All right. Well, you know what? Let me see if I can find my slides. Yes, I have a slideshow.
If only we could share it.
If only we could share it. I bet, there's no sound involved, so I bet that we can. I'm gonna try and see if I can do this.
Got any Here we go.
Yeah, there we go. All right. So let's talk about the Wuhan cover-up. So we're going to start here. This was a meme that a friend of mine shared in October of 2020. And I just want to observe where this was ranked in the general hierarchy of conspiracy theories. So COVID-19 made in a lab is in the science denial section next to Finland doesn't exist, dinosaurs didn't exist, soy boys, whatever that is. I don't know. It is less plausible than the idea that Avril Lavigne was replaced. By the way, Finland doesn't exist and Avril Lavigne replaced were two of the other conspiracy theories people talked about at our soup night. So I was, good contextualizing here. Now, let's start with this quote from a guy named Dr. Peter Daszak of EcoHealth Alliance. Every time there's an emerging disease, a new virus, the same story comes out. This is a spillover or the release of an agent or a bioengineered virus. It's just a shame. It seems humans can't resist controversy and these myths, and yet it's staring us right in the face. There's this incredible diversity of viruses and wildlife, and we've just scratched the surface. Within that diversity, there will be some that can infect people, and within that group will be some that can cause illness. This stuff just happens. So, quick review. You may recall In November, December of 2019, there was a novel coronavirus dubbed SARS-CoV-2 that emerges in Wuhan, China. The Chinese investigation focuses on the Hunan wet market linked to early cases. But some people point out that the Wuhan Institute of Virology studies exactly this kind of virus, and it's just a few miles away. And perhaps we should be asking how this virus got to Wuhan, considering this sort of bat coronavirus. The folks at the Wuhan Institute of Virology have to travel 1,000 miles to the Yunnan province to collect their samples. But somehow we're having this outbreak, naturally right here. In February of 2020, The Lancet, which is a very well-respected scientific journal, there's a letter signed by 27 prominent scientists and ended up getting something like 20,000 signatories online. Among other things, it says, "We stand together to strongly condemn conspiracy theories suggesting that COVID-19 does not have a natural origin." In March of that year, there's a paper published, "The Proximal Origin of SARS-CoV-2." That is cited as giving definitive proof of a natural origin. It says our analysis clearly show that SARS-CoV-2 is not a laboratory construct or a purposefully manipulated virus. And the next year, early that next year in 2021, the WHO investigation, they send a team to Wuhan to check out, the lab there and the wet market and figure out what was going on. They find no wrongdoing by Wuhan Institute of Virology. They, in fact, don't even consider the idea that this could have been a bioengineer. Like they throw in deliberate release in both cases, which, you don't even need to think it was a deliberate release to ask whether this was a bioengineered thing that came from the lab. But they skip over that entirely and say that this has been ruled out by other scientists following analysis of the genome. So it is absolutely insane that you might think that this virus came out of the lab that studied that sort of virus. Despite the fact that there are 40,000 wet markets in China that did not produce SARS-CoV-2, it happened to be the one that was right down the street from the place studying this sort of virus. So we're going to go back to January of 2020. A scientist named Dr. Kristen Anderson of Scripps Research notices a paper that he hadn't seen before. And it freaks him out a little bit. So he emails his friend, Dr. Edward Holmes of the University of Sydney, says, "Eddie, can we talk? I need to be pulled off a ledge here." And I don't know if I can say this word on YouTube, but Edward Holmes uses some choice language to express how distressing this paper is. It's a paper published in Nature Medicine, which is another very prominent journal, in December of 2015, with authors that include Dr. Shi-Zheng Li of the Wuhan Institute of Virology and one Dr. Ralph Barrick of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Another scientist, Dr. Jeremy Farrar, the director of the Wellcome Trust, which is a large philanthropic organization based out of England, is looped into the conversation, and he describes it as a how-to manual for building the Wuhan coronavirus in a laboratory. This conversation continues, eventually getting up to one Dr. Anthony Fauci, the director of the National Institute for Allergies and Infectious Disease, who suggests that they get a group of evolutionary biologists together to examine carefully the data and determine if the concerns are valid. So they have a conference call. On February 1st, there's a conference call with Dr. Fauci and Dr. Francis Collins, who was the director of the NIH at the time, for Dr. Anderson and others to discuss their concerns. Now, we don't have an actual transcript of what happened on the call, but couple of the concerns that were expressed around that time by Dr. Anderson and Dr. Robert Gary, who ended up co-authoring the paper along with Dr. Anderson and a few others. So Dr. Anderson saying his concern is the lab escape version of this so friggin' likely to have happened because they were already doing this type of work and the molecular data is fully consistent with that scenario. Dr. Robert Gary is thinking, I really can't think of a plausible natural scenario where you get from RATG13, more on that later, to one very similar to SARS-CoV-2, where you insert exactly 4 amino acids, 12 nucleotides that all have to be added in the exact same time to gain this function. And you don't change other amino acids in S2. I just can't figure out how this gets accomplished in nature. So these guys who really know what they're talking about are looking at the data and saying, oh, this is really concerning. This looks an awful lot like this could have been created in a lab. And so they go to write their paper. Now, very quickly after this call, there's a pivot in tone. Within hours an early draft has been written by Drs. Anderson, Gary Holmes, and Dr. Andrew Rambot of the University of Edinburgh. Now, one of the things that Dr. Andrew was saying at the time, given the show that would happen if anyone serious accused the Chinese of even accidental release, my feelings is we should say that given there is no evidence of a specifically engineered virus, we cannot possibly distinguish between natural evolution and escape, so we are content with ascribing it to natural process. And Dr. Anderson responds, yep, I totally agree with that. That's a very reasonable conclusion, although I hate it when politics is injected into science, but it's impossible not to, especially given the circumstances. And this draft is sent to Dr. Farrar, who forwards it to Dr. Collins and Fauci for feedback, which we don't have a lot of that. It's not entirely clear how much feedback was given. They did respond with a couple of questions. They were involved from the beginning. Now, a couple weeks later, they have a polished draft that they send off to Nature, which is an incredibly, Nature Medicine is sort of a sub-brand of Nature, but it's a, very, very prominent scientific journal. Very well respected. As Dr. Anderson sends it to Nature, Dr. Farrar also posts the preprint to virological.org, which is kind of a forum for virologists to chat about relevant things like, this paper. And Dr. Farrar is in contact with a guy named Dr. Peter Daszak of EcoHealth Alliance, says, I hope there's a paper letter ready to go to Nature and WHO, which effectively puts to bed the issue of the origin of the virus. I do think it important to get ahead of even more discussion on this, which may well come if this spreads more to US and elsewhere and other respected scientists publish something more inflammatory. Couple days later, the Lancet letter is published. Who is, by the way, spearheaded by a Dr. Peter Daszak of EcoHealth Alliance and recommended to the Lancet by co-signer Dr. Farrar. And it, in fact, cites the initial draft of proximal origins as support for the statement that scientists overwhelmingly conclude this coronavirus originated in wildlife. And it very specifically says, we declare no competing interests. The next day, the initial draft of proximal origin is rejected by Nature. Dr. Claire Thomas, the senior editor at Nature, says, one of our referees, reviewer number 2, raised concerns also emphasized to the editors about whether such a piece would feed or quash the conspiracy theory. So this paper that is cited as evidence of, what they're saying isn't enough evidence. And this is a problem. Dr. Anderson says, unfortunately, none of this helps refute a lab origin, and the possibility must be considered as a scientific theory, which is what we do, and not dismissed out of hand as another conspiracy theory. We all really, really wish that we could do that. That's how this got started. Interesting. But unfortunately, it's just not possible given the data. So they work on it a little more and send it to Nature Medicine, the exact same publication that published the She-Barrick paper way back in the day. February 27th, proximal origin is revised based on feedback from Nature and resubmitted to Nature Medicine. Nature Medicine asked them to trim it down to its original length while retaining revisions from Nature feedback. Now, if you're paying attention, you know that the revisions they were asked for from Nature is to put in more things disproving the lab. And if they're somewhat more agnostic and maybe discussing the possibility of the lab leak, what gets cut when you have to cut stuff that's not that? This was the point that they added the phrases, we do not believe that any type of laboratory-based scenario is plausible, and our analysis clearly show that SARS-CoV-2 is not a laboratory construct or a purposely manipulated virus. March 5th, it's accepted by Nature Medicine, and March 17th, it is published. And Dr. Collins and Dr. Fauci waste no time in citing this as absolutely definitive proof that it's ridiculous that this could have come out of a lab. New story debunks such claims by providing scientific evidence that this novel coronavirus arose naturally. This study leaves little room to refute a natural origin for COVID-19, said Dr. Collins. Dr. Fauci, in a White House press conference, tells a reporter, there was a study recently that we can make available to you where a group of highly qualified evolutionary virologists looked at the sequences there and the sequences in bats as they evolve, and the mutations that it took to get to the point where it is now is totally consistent with a jump of a species from an animal to a human. So, I mean, the paper will be available to you. I don't have the authors right now, but we can make that available to you. Does that sound like somebody talking about a paper that he was involved in the initial draft? Seems like he didn't want that known. I don't know. So, what does proximal origin actually say? Well, it's not a very long paper. It's about 3 pages long. There's a bunch of stuff that is getting into, very detailed description of highly technical things, but you can really boil down its case to 3 points. First, the receptor binding domain. So there are 2 unique things about the SARS-CoV-2 virus. The receptor binding domain is a particular part of the virus that binds to what's called an ACE2 receptor. And it's how it interfaces with human cells and makes it infectious for human beings. And a furin cleavage site is something else that helps with the actual injection process. I'm not familiar with the actual details. All you really need to know to follow this is that those are 2 very unique things about the SARS-CoV-2 virus. And so you're gonna focus on those. So talking about the receptor binding domain is novel. This is not something that they've seen before. It's not a receptor binding domain that the models at the time would have predicted was particularly good at binding to human cells. And so their argument is that if somebody was trying to engineer a virus, then they would use existing literature. They would use, some published receptor binding domain that was optimal given the current models. Point 2. While furin cleavage sites have not been observed in other SARS-CoV viruses, that's the particular classification of virus that SARS-CoV-2 falls under, it's a big wide world of genetic variety, and we'll probably find another one soon. Literally, this is the argument. Yeah, we've never seen this before, but we probably will see another one. To this day, we haven't, but that was their argument. And finally, 3, SARS-CoV-2 is not derived from a previously used viral backbone. And if it was engineered, somebody would have used a published backbone, right? Like, it doesn't look like a fake virus because it's not the, simple Lego brick version that they would have made. Now, the interesting thing about that 3rd point is that they actually cite a specific viral backbone that the Wuhan Institute of Virology had just published saying, hey, we have this one. It's not a direct progenitor. This is not where, the virus came from, but you can see how similar this is. This is totally the kind of thing that you could find in nature. And that is RATG13. Now, how they can say in this paper, here's this example of, a naturally occurring virus that is very, very similar. And also it's completely novel. Like somebody would have used an existing virus, and definitely not that. And how they have those together in the same paper and nobody cares, I don't know. Like, a lot of this doesn't track for me. It's that the pressures they were under. They had to make this work. So, they got to try to tell the truth, but also they're not going to get published unless they are absolutely discrediting the idea this could have been made in a lab. So, they're working with it. So anyway, RATG13, where did that come from? It is 96.2% similar to SARS-CoV-2 genetically. Now, importantly, it does not have a furin cleavage site, and it has a different receptor binding domain. But like the overall structure of the virus is incredibly similar. This was a sample that the Wuhan Institute of Virology had taken in caves in Mojang in the Yunnan province in 2013. In 2012, then there were about a half dozen miners that got sick with some kind of pneumonia. 3 of them died. And so the Wuhan Institute of Virology came in to take a bunch of samples from bats and figure out, what it is that did it. And they reportedly got, hundreds of different samples. And this was just one of them. Now, interestingly, they were working in conjunction with a fellow named Dr. Peter Daszak of EcoHealth Alliance through a USAID funded PREDICT project that was there were 2 5-year chunks of this that the basic idea was to, globally sample a whole bunch of viruses and figure out, what are, ones that are likely to break through to people and how do we prepare for this. But he was working in conjunction with the Wuhan Institute of Virology in getting these samples. When PREDICT ended in 2018, a little over 6,000 samples were left in Wuhan Institute of Virology freezers, despite the fact that this was a US-funded project. They were just working with the Wuhan Institute of Virology because, they're good buddies. On the grant that Dr. Shi was working on, she claimed to have collected over 1,640 new viruses over the course of the collaboration. So we're dealing with a whole bunch of novel viruses from bats that, not all of them are published. We don't know what was in there, but they had an extensive library of these. And one of them was 96.2% similar to SARS-CoV-2. Now, Later on, we have actually found a slightly more similar viral sample. That is Banal 52, which was discovered in Laos in 2022. It was only about 500 kilometers from the Mojang caves. Like if you look at a map, Yunnan province is like just north of Laos. And so those caves are pretty much right over the border. So it's not inconceivable that the bat populations would overlap, and perhaps a virus similar to this would have been included in the samples that the Predict project and Dr. Shi collected over the course of the 2010s. And it is 96.8% similar to SARS-CoV-2, which looks like a very small increase, but critically, the receptor binder domain is nearly identical. So this is, one of the very unique things about SARS-CoV-2 is the receptor binder domain. And here is one that, Dr. Holmes pointed out, like, oh, here it is showing up in nature. Obviously, this is, evidence that it could have evolved naturally. And like, yeah, this probably did evolve naturally. It also could have been a sample that the Wuhan Institute of Virology had to play with. Notice we're still not talking about a receptor binder domain. Like the original concerns about like how would that naturally evolve without disrupting other parts of the genome. That is not something that the authors addressed in their paper, even though the fact they started with that concern, like how is it this would have happened? We don't know. And they never answered that. Now, so far, this has been very circumstantial, but there has actually been a number of scientists globally who have come up with some fairly concrete evidence that this is likely a lab-constructed virus. So this is a preprint authored by 3 scientists. One of them is a statistician. Part of what they do in the paper is calculate the probability that a virus would naturally evolve this particular pattern. But looking at the structure of SARS-CoV-2, there's a very, very high level. There's an idea of cutting sites, that when you are working with a virus in a lab and you're cloning it, then you want to be able to cut it into pieces to copy them individually and then reassemble, because it's better for the process. It also means that you can modularly switch out parts of it, including the spike protein where the receptor binding domain and foreign cleavage site code exist. So conceivably, you could have a viral backbone that is 96 point some percent similar, that you then swap out the spike protein for something that you've, run through culture a number of times to evolve artificially this targeted characteristic that you've been selecting for, and then swap it back into the original backbone. So none of the other changes that might have happened, and there wouldn't be other mutations coming into play. And they looked at the distribution of these cutting sites in SARS-CoV-2 and basically rated them based on how uniformly they're out. And it's not perfectly uniform. There are a couple of smaller segments, but overall it cuts it into 6 pieces, 4 of which are very incredibly close to the same length, which is the ideal that you would be aiming for if you were engineering something to be, swapped in a lab. If you're trying to do this, I think it's called in vitro genome assembly, I want to say. And if you're doing this, then having an evenly spaced set of cutting sites is going to be ideal. And it was vanishing unlikely, something like 0.07% chance that something this even would naturally emerge. Beyond that, a bit of red thread that I noticed that I hadn't seen anybody else talking about. They cite a particular paper in their paper describing an operation where they specifically used a couple of these cutting sites to isolate the spike protein. Like explicitly, this is what we're trying to do. And that was a paper written by a guy named Ben Hu, Dr. Ben Hu, which I recognized as someone else connected with a totally different side thread of this story that didn't make it into the presentation. But he's a major player at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. So we know that this was literally something that they were doing. Now, this paper itself is disputed and unpublished. It has been reviewed by a lot of scientists worldwide who don't want their names published for obvious reasons. But these 3 guys who are putting it forward to begin with have been taking a pretty bad beating, professionally and otherwise. But I think it's a reasonably compelling theory that the criticism that I've read, as far as I can understand, is roughly like, yeah, but like it still could happen. And it's like, cool, like that's 0.07%. Great. Yeah, let's hang on to that. You're saying there's a chance. Furthermore, in April of 2018, a grant proposal by a guy named Dr. Peter Daszak of EcoHealth Alliance was rejected by DARPA. Now, what were they trying to do in this project? I'm going to turn the summary over to Dr. Alina Chan of Harvard Medical School, who has been a major figure in figuring out a lot of, what we now know about the process. And she describes this as, we're going to look for novel SARS-like viruses in the wild. We're going to put these novel furin cleavage sites and see what happens. And we're going to test these viruses in human cells to see how these features can impact their ability to replicate and cause disease. So that's what they were saying they wanted to do about a year and a half before a novel coronavirus emerged from the lab that they said they were going to be working at, exhibiting a furin cleavage site for the first time ever in this type of virus. And we have still not found a naturally occurring furin cleavage site in a SARS-CoV virus in the wild. The proposal was rejected in part because it did not assess potential gain of function, dual use of current concern risks, or really have any concern for ethics whatsoever. So Dr. Peter Daszak of EcoHealth Alliance, ladies and gentlemen. So, summarize. Was SARS-CoV-2 created in a lab? We don't know. We don't know. This isn't proof of anything. We do not know. It maybe could have, come from the wet market. Who knows? What we do know is that Dr. Peter Daszak of EcoHealth Alliance was actively involved in discrediting any suggestion of a lab leak with no regard for his obvious conflict of interest. Now, whether that was because he knew there was something to hide, or whether he's just like, I do not want nasty attention on my buddies at Wuhan Institute of Virology, who can say? But he was very much acting unethically. SARS-CoV-2 exhibits a distinct cutting site structure specifically well-suited to modular replacement of the spike protein containing the receptor binding domain and furin cleavage site, something which can emerge naturally but is vanishingly unlikely. Wuhan Institute of Virology and its collaborators have demonstrated the means and intent to engineer chimeric viruses with furin cleavage sites in this way. They wanted to do this. They had the means to do it. They had the opportunity to do it. Wuhan Institute of Virology had in its possession a previously unpublished viral backbone very similar to SARS-CoV-2, which the authors of Proximal Origin mention in the paper itself, negating their third point. Wuhan Institute of Virology could plausibly have had an unpublished viral backbone similar to Banal 52, containing the novel receptor binding domain, which negates the first point. And to this day, no one has found a direct progenitor of SARS-CoV-2 in nature, nor any SARS-CoV viruses with a furin cleavage site, negating point 2. So the main thrust of all three bits of the argument put forward by Proximal Origin really don't hold up at all. They don't actually explain what we're seeing. And it is still held up as definitive proof that this was absolutely something that emerged naturally from the wet market instead of something that was engineered for the purposes of, seeing how infectious it would get and, evaluating the risks of like, what if this naturally emerged? Because like, that's what they were doing. They weren't trying to engineer a bioweapon, although there are some threads of this that connect to the Chinese military and who knows what they might have wanted to do. But COVID is not a very good bioweapon. Like it's probably not made for that, but it does fit with this research project that they very explicitly wanted to do. And who knows where funding might have come from. Here's the thing about research. When you're putting a grant proposal out, you probably have not waited to start work on things until you have your proposal out. That's just not how things work. And the fact that this idea existed, you're not getting funding from DARPA, but the folks at Wuhan Institute of Virology think this is a pretty cool, useful idea for whatever applications they want for it. They're pretty tight with Peter Daszak. Like there are multiple ways this could have happened, but the information was there. The intent was there. It seems very, very plausible that this is something that could have happened. This is not completely nutso territory, but we don't know. So the epilogue, where are they now? Let's check in on our buddies. So Dr. Kristen Anderson in May of 2020 Fauci approves an $8.9 million grant for Anderson, which pending during the period Proximal Origins was written. It was sort of initially reviewed and approved in November of 2019, but it was sitting on Fauci's desk waiting for final approval for months as, all of this unfolded. And finally in May, he signs it and Dr. Anderson gets his funding. Dr. Anderson denies the pending grant had any impact on the paper or that it was influenced in any way by Dr. Fauci. His initial concerns were put to rest naturally. He said under oath in a congressional hearing, as is almost always the case in science, this change in belief was not based on a single piece of evidence, but a combination of many factors, including additional data, analyses, learning more about coronaviruses, and discussions with colleagues and collaborators. It's beyond the scope of this testimony to detail all of these factors, and we have thoroughly documented why we believe SARS-CoV-2 is a natural virus in our reports and peer-reviewed scientific publications. So, Proximal Origin stands as his final word on what convinced him. The WHO investigation mentioned that there was an investigative team that went to Wuhan in 2021. The final report rejects the idea of a bioengineered virus, cites a single study, Proximal Origin. That's all that they need to completely dismiss the idea that this could have come from the lab. They suggest, however, a more likely scenario is the virus came to China from somewhere else, riding on frozen food. I'm not making this up. This is literally a scenario they put forward as being more probable than coming out of the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And the second follow-up investigation was quietly canceled in 2023. And by the way, the sole U.S. member of the team, Dr. Peter Daszak of EcoHealth Alliance. Now, I do want to emphasize there is absolutely no evidence that our reviewer number 2, who was so concerned that the paper was not going to adequately quash the conspiracy theories when it was submitted to Nature. There is absolutely no evidence that that was Peter Daszak of EcoHealth Alliance, but wouldn't that be funny? Anyway, Dr. Jeremy Farrar, in December of 2022, Dr. Farrar is made chief scientist at WHO. Good on him. The journals in April of 2024, Lancet editor-in-chief, Dr. Richard Horton, and Nature editor-in-chief, Dr. I don't know how to pronounce that, Skipper, declined to attend the House subcommittee hearing on academic malpractice, examining the relationship between scientific journals, the government, and peer review. This was the course of, there was a 2-year investigation that this House subcommittee, select subcommittee, did over the COVID response in general, and includes a significant chunk at the beginning about Proximal Origin and a lot of the stuff. But the editors involved declined to show up, so we don't have their thoughts on how their journals were involved in this process. So the report was dropped in December of 2024 after 2-year investigation. House Select Subcommittee on the Coronavirus Pandemic releases their after action review. And that's where a lot of this information comes from. Like all of the quotes are from FOIA'd emails and Slack messages and such. So yeah, that's a 500-page report that you can find online that covers this in an introductory section. But if you are interested in where we landed on what science never had any science behind it, there is all sorts of goodies in this whole report. That same month, Dr. Shizheng Li publishes dozens of coronavirus sequences from Wuhan Institute of Virology in Nature. Now, this particular paper is behind a paywall, so I haven't been able to pop in and check exactly how many sequences she published, but I don't think it was 1,640. But whatever she published, she considers to be sufficient to prove that none of the viruses at Wuhan Institute of Virology are recent ancestors of SARS-CoV-2. So definitely what didn't come from there. In January of 2025, Dr. Peter Daszak and EcoHealth Alliance are barred from receiving federal funding for 5 years after it comes to light that they failed to report gain of function in research conducted at Wuhan Institute of Virology. NIH did not enforce any oversight, and Dr. Shi has ignored all attempts to acquire the lab notebooks from Wuhan Institute of Virology. Now, this is a total side plot to everything that we just talked about, but it does illustrate the working relationship between Dr. Peter Daszak of EcoHealth Alliance, the NIH, and the Wuhan Institute of Virology. So yeah, that's wild. Dr. Anthony Fauci, in January of 2025, Dr. Fauci is pardoned by President Biden for nothing in particular. And the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Just last month, Dr. Shi publishes a fun new virus as work at Wuhan Institute of Virology continues apace. So what? So, quote from Dr. Alex Washburn, who is one of the authors of the paper putting forth the case that this is actually a, very probably synthetic virus. The lack of transparency we're seeing from labs at the heart of lab origin hypotheses makes me deeply afraid of the surge of similar virological research absent global coordination on biosafety. If another unusual virus with anomalous sequences inserted exactly as proposed by researchers emerges from hotspots, far from hotspots of wildlife viral diversity and adjacent to a hotspot of the proposed virological research, will we be kept in the dark about laboratory records then too? So, that is my presentation. You didn't get the peanut soup. I made peanut soup for our friend group, but yeah. So that is my claiming the mantle of Madman.
And it's okay. I don't particularly care for peanuts, but we will leave it up to the audience to decide. That was quite the presentation, I got to say.
Yeah, I definitely did more research on my conspiracy theory than others did. But I think they appreciated it.
Yeah, I guess most people don't put that much stock in the Finland doesn't exist theory. I've heard that about other places. Like I've heard Australia is made up, or Antarctica. The Antarctica one's usually from flat Earth theorists. Although, apparently, did you hear about how they brought the one flat earther to the South Pole and he actually admitted he was wrong?
He was like, did a live stream of like watching the sun just like circle around the sky and is like, yeah, okay, that's fair. I don't know what I'm looking at now.
Yeah. But, certainly is stuff to make you think. And that's what we will leave it at it for. Oh, how long did it take you to do all that research?
I mean, it was over the course of a few weeks, I guess, just sort of, I mean, a lot of it I've generally been following over the years because I was, I don't know, like I mentioned the whole, like there are 40,000 wet markets and only a couple of BSL-4 labs things. Like it was plausible to me from the beginning, and it was weird how quickly everybody just jumped on board with like, oh, like people who know what they're saying say this is obviously crazy. And I was like, well, okay, the people who know what they're saying can perhaps explain why this is completely crazy because I'm not getting it. And so getting some level of vindication that it was, they shared the exact concerns and it was completely valid. And then they covered it up was is delightful to discover. And like actually having the receipts to say, hey, yeah, this is what they were saying. I'm not crazy.
And did you read the entire 500 pages?
Most of it. I mean, there are some chunks of it that I didn't, but I at least skimmed everything. Read in detail the things that I was more interested in.
Yeah. I could believe it. We did get another question from the same person. Have you heard of the Gaslight District? I did hear of it. It's a upcoming thing.
I mean, I've heard, like, tell me what this specific thing is.
It's an upcoming indie animated project. I think. Let me just quickly check. I just want to see.
I have that more linked in my mind to Call of Cthulhu scenarios.
It's from Glitch, the same people that do the Amazing Digital Circus.
Oh, okay, that's fun.
They've got a whole bunch of other animated things coming up.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that I think that's going to be their like Victorian steampunk gothic kind of piece.
Nice. That should be fun.
There's a trailer up right now. So, well, where do we go from there, huh? Well, we've been at this for how long? A little over 2 hours by now. That's not bad. Any other topics you wanted to bring up, or you ready to call it a night? Or
No, I could call it. I guess final call for questions in the comments.
Sure.
If there's any particular thing, I mean, the various recommendations are fun, but if there are any specific topics you would like to hear us expound upon,
we'll see what comes in. Let's see. I guess while we're waiting, like we spoke about movies, but you've also made it pretty clear you've read a lot. Any particular books that you consider near and dear to your heart, or that you take inspiration from?
Well, I'll say that one of the most formative books for me was Ender's Game. Reading that as so we were both homeschooled. I was homeschooled up through 8th grade, and then I went to high school. And so here I am, at a important developmental period, dropping into a completely unfamiliar social situation. And I'm reading this book about this, super smart kid trying to think his way through a, similar sort of situation. And so I, jive with that a whole lot. And so yeah, Ender's Game, Ender's Shadow, telling the same story from another character's perspective. The later Ender's Game series books are good too, but they, Speaker from the Dead onwards is a very, very different sort of story. But Ender's Game in particular was a very important book to me.
Yeah. Of course, I remember we were all very big into Tolkien.
Oh yeah. I need to reread the Silmarillion at some point. I have not read that since I was in high school.
I think I saw somebody post a meme about that from taking footage from the Lord of the Rings movies, when the scene where the writing appears on the One Ring. Frodo says, "I can't read it." Gandalf says, "There are a few who can, but it's the Silmarillion."
Yeah.
Do you do all the filming as well as direct when you're making?
Depends on the project. Typically, if I am directing, then I have a crew that is taking care of all the technical stuff. There are a number of people that I really like working with as cinematographers. Having somebody good on sound is absolutely critical. That's who I prefer to be on other people's sets. I want to be the sound guy, so that director just doesn't need to worry about that. I will be focused on making sure you get nice, clean sound, and you can focus on whatever fires you're going to be putting out. But yeah, so for the I mentioned the project that I helped my friend out on with his marriage interview in the basement of the library. That one I did pretty much all the tech. I've got a picture somewhere of me with a easy rig holding the camera with the boom mic set up on a C-stand over one of the actors, and we've got all the lights up, and so it's just like me with all of my tech, and then the two actors sitting at the table. So that was largely a one-man band tech situation, but that is not how I prefer to work. I'd much rather have a skilled team of folks that know what they're doing, focusing on their individual tasks, and you usually get a better product a lot easier that way.
Indeed. Since you do your hand on stop motion, I'll ask, what is your favorite stop motion feature?
Oh, that one is tricky. Maybe Coraline. I really, really like of Leica's stuff. I really, really like Coraline, Paranorman, and Kubo and the Two Strings. Their other stuff is generally fun, but those are the three really good ones. Obviously, Nightmare Before Christmas is an absolute delight. I'm going to refrain from putting check animation into the running, although there is a special place in my heart for the I think it was Fankmeyer. I don't remember, but some Czech animator did a Alice in Wonderland that used actual like taxidermy animals that were actively decaying over the course of filming.
Yeesh.
And so you have, this stop motion animated rabbit corpse that is just like becoming more skeletal as the movie goes on.
That's horrifying.
That's wild.
What about, I assume you saw Mad God?
Oh, Mad God is an absolute delight. It is mad.
and like, well, obviously the Ray Harryhausen filmography, even though they're not fully stop motion.
Oh yeah, no, they're absolutely delightful and incredibly impressive, given that they were doing it on film without the digital aids that we have today.
Yeah.
I have never done stop motion on film, but I have done it, without a digital guide, and the immense difference is just staggering. You are, able to stream your frames directly into a computer and just like immediately play back and toggle back and forth. You can see exactly what you're looking at right now and what the last frame was. And there's so much nuance that you can get in there that Harryhausen did with surface gauges.
Yeah. And he worked with real animals too. The crab in Mysterious Island that he had for dinner.
I once animated a dead eel for a pencil lens project.
There you go. Which of the Harryhausen ones would you say, or Willis O'Brien, or one of those guys?
Jason and the Argonauts. That's a fun one
with the skeletons.
It's classic. Like just so many delightful monsters.
I would say his best monster character has got to be the Emir from 20 Million Miles to Earth, though.
Okay,
you know that one, right?
It's been a while.
The Emir, like, we literally follow it from the moment it's born all the way through, and our hearts are with it the whole while.
Yeah.
And of course, when it comes to stop motion, I believe I introduced you to Bump in the Night.
Yes. Oh, that one's fun.
Yeah. I need to do a video about that one. That was such a fun series back in the day. There was nothing else like it on TV. This weird stop motion story about living toys and monsters in a house, and it just sort of disappeared, and I never knew what happened to it until I saw it on DVD in the $5 bin one day. I was like, okay, I must.
Nope, that is a fun one.
Yeah. Let's see what else. Oh, someone doesn't know what Mad God is. Almighty Oreo King doesn't. Might want to.
Mad God was a project. If you know who Phil Tippett is, he did the stop motion effects for Star Wars. So like the chessboard in the first movie, and then the big snow walkers in Empire Strikes Back. So Phil Tippett did the animation for that. And you might also recognize the name from the credits of Jurassic Park. He was credited as the dinosaur supervisor. So we have all the memes based on that. But he was originally going to do stop motion dinosaurs for Jurassic Park. And I think that he famously quipped, something about going extinct when he saw the digital demo of the T-Rex that ended up selling Spielberg on doing it that way. He was still very involved in the animation process. They actually had physical puppets with digital input devices to control the actual animated dinosaur in the computer. They weren't, going with mouse pad to animate this creature. They were physically animating a puppet. But anyway, in the 90s, he started his own side project called Mad God that is just this really dark, surreal acid trip of a movie that he shot some of it then, and then in the 2010s, then he ran a series of Kickstarter campaigns to fund the finishing of it. And it came out in its full glory a few years back. And it is just peak weird art. It's incredibly dark and disturbing, and is just this multi-layered descent into madness that you should absolutely check out if you have not.
And I believe if you're curious about what the stop motion Jurassic Park would have looked like, they include some of the test shots in one of the special features on the first movie. I think they did the TV special, and they had a few of the shots of the T-Rex and the Raptor.
Yeah.
And they're actually pretty good. Let's see. Oh, referring back to the filming as well as directing question, between filming and directing, which one do you enjoy doing more? Or putting it another way, do you enjoy directing or tech, or both?
So I really like having a simple, specific job that I can focus on. I really love running sound for other people, I mentioned, because that's a low stress way that I can provide a lot of value to the production. You know, I'm not needing to make spur of the moment creative decisions because, you know, the goal that audio needs to accomplish on set is pretty straightforward. It can be, you know, technically challenging to figure out how you're going to get the mic where you need to get the mic, but it's, you know, very, you know, straightforward problem solving. When I'm directing, then, you know, there's so much that I need to have in my head. I need to figure out how everything is going to work together. And I've spent a lot of time before the shoot, you know, basically thinking through, these are the shots, these are how they're going to fit together somehow. These are the important details that actually link things together and make things work. But then there's inevitably going to be cool ideas that we have on set, and then figuring out how do those integrate into this larger picture that I have. Or, you know, we have challenges come up that we can't actually get things done a particular way and need to, you know, work within this bigger picture of how this all works together to figure out some way that, you know, we can solve all the problems that come out from that. So it's very, very different types of thinking. I, on like a regular basis, I would very much prefer just to be the audio guy. But when I've got a project that I'm really excited about, then it is so much fun to figure out how to actually execute it and get the story told in a, you know, compelling way on, you know, on multiple levels.
And of course, that actually reminds me, you did sound recording for some of the voice actors in the New Aberdeen tapes.
Yeah.
So, of course, thank you for that. I'm pretty sure, I don't recall if I ever publicly acknowledged you in the credits. I hope I did, but if not,
no worries. If not, I pretty much just supplied equipment and sat to the side and hit go.
Yeah, but you made sure the performers sounded good. So let's see. Is there any other questions, folks? I'm not seeing anything else come in. So if we wanted to wrap this up, was there anything you wanted to promote? Any advice you wanted to impart? Any words of wisdom or the secret stock market info or whatever?
There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
And Peter Dasnick is a dick. Those are my thoughts.
There you go. Anything you want to promote? I know we've mentioned a couple of things.
No, the stuff I have going on right now isn't really needing promotion, I guess. I don't know.
We did get one last question come in. What's your favorite traditionally animated movie? So we're talking like hand-drawn, two-dimensional.
So that is far too broad a question for me to concretely answer, but I will say that when I got a Blu-ray player, the very first movie that I watched on it was a Blu-ray edition of The Great Mouse Detective. And watching that on Blu-ray and seeing just like the subtle detail of the penwork in the lines that, you know, not intentional, but just every single frame was screaming, this was made by a human hand. That was an absolutely delightful way to watch a wonderful movie.
That actually reminds me, there's a documentary I recently watched that you can find on Tubi. It's called Pencils to Pixels. It's about basically the history of animation, the rise and fall of 2D, the rise of CGI, and the rise again of 2D. And towards the end, one of the animators said that while he was working on this one short film, I think it was Dear Basketball, the guy who animated that one. I think that's what it's called. It won an Oscar, apparently.
Yeah, I think I remember seeing that.
Yeah. And it was hand drawn.
Mhm.
He was working on it with one of his sons, and his son commented, "You know, the line you just drew on that paper is the first and last time that line will ever exist." And out of curiosity, they put it under a really powerful microscope, and with the line, the way the graphite interacted with the different fibers made what, and they showed it, made what he described as a silvery star field that was entirely unique to that image.
That's pretty cool.
And yeah, that's one of the great things about the hand-drawn style, you know?
Yeah.
And it is making a comeback. I mean, Klaus was they kind of melded hand-drawn and digital, but it looks amazing, of course. Do we get any others? Have you heard of Irma by Outcast Studios? Oh, I've heard of that one. It's a webcomic, and they've started animating it. Irma is the daughter of a regular human and a ghost that's kind of based on the one from The Ring.
Okay.
Sort of like their domestic life being like a normal family, but with these supernatural elements to them.
That's cool.
Like there's this interesting, well, what they've started doing animated versions, and like there's one where they're going to the mall to get a family picture taken, and after dealing with all the distractions that are keeping them from there, they finally get to the picture. The picture is taken, but because the mother and the daughter are ghosts, their faces look horrifying in the final shot. And it pulls back, you see a wall. All the pictures of them look that way. So that kind of humor. Also, as far as Phil Tippett goes, you familiar with Prehistoric Beast? I think that's.
I actually am not.
It's one of his.
I greatly enjoy Phil Tippett, so I'm surprised at myself that I haven't seen this, but I should look that up.
I want to say it's on YouTube, or it was at some point. So, all right then. I guess we can call it here if you're ready.
Sounds good to me. Thank you much for having me.
Thank you for coming on board. I think we showed everybody here quite an interesting time. Anything could have happened, right? And that's where
Madman on the channel, things happen.
So, yep, we provided a fascinating and informative live stream. And we can close it out knowing that. So you can say goodbye however you'd like to.
Bye.
Works for me. And until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer signing off.